Ethics Committee meeting this morning. It is March the 22nd. If you would please join me for the invocation. Well, this is going to be a stressful week, and we need your guidance and your patience and your wisdom as we deal with the challenges of important matters of our state and legislation. Give us your grace and your mercy. In Christ's name, amen. Welcome. The chairman notes the presence of a quorum. Grateful for our senators who can be here this morning. We have a brief but very important agenda. We will begin this morning by addressing HB 333. This is Chairman Estration's bill. He has already been kind enough to present the bill to the committee. We have taken public testimony. I need a motion to take HB 333 off the table. A movement by Senator Miller, second Senator Hatchett. Without objection, HB 333 is off the table. Does any senator wish to speak to HB 333? Chair recognizes the whip.
At the appropriate time, I'd like to make an amendment to HB 333.
I see no objection to that. Any other discussion before we consider the amendment? Thank you. Chair recognizes Majority Leader.
33.
Excuse me, the President Pro Tem.
333.
What mic is?
I got a copy of this morning.
And it's considered a friendly amendment.
I haven't had a chance to run it through my channels yet. But I understand it's late session. I understand that's the will of the committee. So, I don't have any.
Mr. Whip, is this a friendly amendment? That's my bottom line.
I think
yeah.
it's friendly for the Georgian taxpayers, yes.
Okay.
It's in the best.
I'm anxious to hear it.
All right,
Thank you.
You'll
Thank
like
you.
it.
I like my sponsor and my amendment sponsor. So
You'll like it. There is an amendment in your folder, but it was an amendment to a substitute to HB 333. So I'm going to ask that we make 3 changes to the amendment that you have before
All right.
you.
Is
They're
it
very
correct?
easy.
We have HB 333 LC 413111S. That is the underlying bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And is the substitute?
The substitute is not a substitute.
It's an amendment.
It's an amendment to
excuse me.
HB 333. But you see it in your binder, and that's where I'll go over it with you at the appropriate time.
It is amendment number 281836. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. It is. The chair will entertain a motion for an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend House Bill 3333 with Amendment AM 281836.
I need a second. Second from Senator Anavitarte. We're now.
Is this for discussion?
Yeah, no, we will have discussion now and then consider action.
And I would like to make a couple Scribner's error changes, if I could, corrections. Can I do that before we entertain the?
Continue, Mr. Whip.
So on line 1, where it says amend the substitute, I would like to strike substitute, actually amend, you would strike the substitute to, so you would strike those 3 words. And then on down line 1, in lieu of accounts, strike accounts and write in complaints. And then on line 4, instead of line 7, everybody clear on line 1? We're good there?
After line 1, where are you? I'm sorry.
After line 1, we're going to skip down to line 6, and we're going to replace line 218 with line 209.
Just let's, for clarification, on line 1, it would read.
Go ahead, you got it.
Amend HB 333 LC 413111S by inserting after complaints in quotation marks on line 4. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, and now continue, please.
And then on line 6, it would read, action committee during a legislative session, and inserting after line 209 the following. And then the language from lines 8 through 19 should remain the same.
All right, thank you.
And if you want me to explain this, I'll be happy to.
I would like for you to address the amendment and then allow discussion from the committee, and we'll certainly ask.
So
Chairman
I think
Frustation to
this
consider.
language simply closes some loopholes, and it blocks any campaign contributions from being pledged or solicited while we are in legislative session. This would not allow any elected official, whether they're statewide or in the General Assembly, from accepting contributions while we're in session through their campaign accounts, which is already currently prohibited, but any other PACs or affiliated organizations that they are affiliated with.
Any questions for Senator Gooch's amendment? I'll recognize the author initially to respond if you choose to.
Yeah, I don't have any further response other than I think the WHIP's goals and objectives here are, appears to be good policy, and so I don't have any objection as I stand here now. As I said, the campaign finance laws are very technical, and so I just haven't vetted it with the experts and the Georgia Ethics Commission, whose bill I was carrying this, who's asked me to carry the legislation that I brought here. But I don't have any objection as I stand here now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chair recognizes the minority leader for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask Senator Gooch, isn't this your Section 9A?
Yes.
Isn't that already in the law? What's different about this amendment?
So if you look at the language in 15, no political action committee which is affiliated with or which coordinates with a member of the General Assembly or such member's campaign committee, or is affiliated with or coordinates with a public officer elected statewide or such public officer's campaign committee shall seek or accept a contribution or a pledge of a contribution to such political action committee during a legislative session. So I do not believe that current law would do what this provision will do. I believe there are not necessarily unintentional consequences, but I believe under current law there are PACs that exist that can accept contributions by members who are already in public office today.
Okay. I just thought that was already.
No, ma'am. I think
something
you'll
that-
find that this closes that loophole that we've discussed in the past.
Other questions or discussion?
Chairman Burns, may I offer to the chairman here
Certainly.
behind me that we will work with him when it gets back over to the House. They'll have to either agree or amend the bill. So if he finds that there is a problem with what our Ledge Council has drafted here, then they will have an opportunity to correct it even further. So
Thank
I'd be
you.
open
Thank
to
you for your
working
willingness to
with him.
work with
Yes, sir.
our friends from the
I appreciate
House
him.
Judiciary Committee. Other comments? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to recommend due pass by substitute, by Senate Committee substitute as amended. Senator Robertson makes the motion. Is there a second? Senator Avatarte. Those in favor of the motion recommend HB 333 do pass by substitute. Indicate with the uplifted hand. Those opposed, similarly, one. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman F. Station. We appreciate your help. We look forward to continuing our work together. Okay. Very good. We're now ready to consider HB 531, which is the House proposed legislation that was on the table from last week. I need a motion to remove HB 531 from the table. So move from the President Pro Tem. A second. Senator Avatarte. Without objection, 531 is now on the table. The chair will now entertain a member for a potential substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may notice I'm looking at LC 280331 Sierra.
Let's make sure everyone has the exact correct substitute for House Bill 531.
The white copy.
It's the white copy. It should be behind the pink copy, which was LC 280264S. So that's correct. So we're now considering, from the majority leader, LC 280331S.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may notice there are significant changes between.
We need a motion to submit the substitute for, so move.
Second.
Second, without objection. Now we just got that housekeeping cleaned up, we're ready.
Okay. There are significant changes between 531 and the substitute you see in front of you. To give you the short version of it, this 531 now looks a lot like SB 241 without the excuse provisions and the mail-in absentees in there that seemed to cause consternation as 241 was moving through. There are some other slight changes, and I would like to recommend further changes if possible. On line 21, or page 21, I'm looking at line 530. The way that technically reads is you have two options, and I would like first to at least consider or have the conversation at beginning at, if looking at no later than 9 a.m. and ending no earlier than 5, and then down further with the advanced voting on 533, change from no earlier than 7 a.m. until no later than 7 p.m. That gives the counties some flexibility to a window of time in there to get this started. I could argue that both ways. It could be confusing to the voters if they did not have a previously established time, or it gives the counties some flexibility to work. Let's say they wanted to go 8 to 5 instead of 9 to 5. But I'm open to, I'm throwing that out to the body here to see what the thoughts are from the committee.
So with your adjustments.
530 and 533.
530 and 533, it would read, 530 would read Saturday prior to primary or election no later
than 9 a.m.
than 9 a.m.
and ending no earlier than 5. And then down at 533, no earlier than 7 a.m. and no later than 7 p.m. And
Correct.
Obviously that would also need to include in there in the verbiage again on this one without judicial action. So this doesn't replace earlier in the bill where under due cause a Superior Court judge can maintain polls being open. This would just be standard.
Would this also apply in line 517 or line 522?
I think it would need to read the same throughout.
Yeah, that was my question. My question is where we see right now beginning at and ending at, we would replace with no later and no earlier. And when we see from, I guess that's I just see it on line 917, again on 922, and there may be other instances.
So that's what I'm asking y'all, is that would that, in a goal to create flexibility for the polling stations, does it create more confusion than the flexibility is worth on that?
What's the will of the committee? Chair recognizes the President Pro Tem.
I think Senator from the 29th.
Very good. Chair recognizes Senator from the 29th.
Majority Leader, I think I'm confused from the offset. Can you please ask your question about if we're confused or not again, about what we're supposed to be confused about? Yeah.
Sorry.
The way the bill reads right now, you can be implied that you have option A or option B. There is no maneuverability in that. Let's say instead of you didn't want to go 9 to 5 and you didn't want to go 7 to 7, you can't go 8 to 5.
Right.
So what I was trying to do on this to thoroughly confuse you is to put a window in between that 2 hour gap, that they have flexibility to move within that 2 hour window. And that's why I asked the question, because of the look that you had on your face when I was trying to explain it. Does that create more confusion to the voter if I'm going there at 7 and that poll has decided it's going to open at 8? Would it be better to clearly define just the two options than have that flexibility in there?
Chair recognizes Pro Tem.
In light of the continued interest in having accessibility to the polling place, and in light of the spirit of not suppressing or any vote, et cetera, I would move to leave each county to have the flexibility to be open as many hours as humanly possible. And I think that even though there might be some explanation due from the county offices, that would be on the county offices, but this would give them the maximum number of hours available. And
Yeah, at the most lenient on this thing, they're going to have 12 hours on those weekend days.
yes, sir.
That's correct. That's correct. And just a comment. Would it meet the will of the committee to just allow voting between no earlier than 7 a.m., no later than 7 p.m., and then let the local officials determine where within that period they choose to vote? But you're saying we have to have at least 9 to 5, those eight hours.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it any
Nope,
shorter than that, especially on a general.
Right.
That just with the numbers, what you don't, that same mindset. In some of our smaller counties, and remember, we're not writing a bill for 3 counties.
No.
We're writing a bill for 159. So some of the smaller ones may not have the requirement to be open 12 hours on a given Saturday, where others do. So that's why I was trying to give them that window in there where they can expand or contract as needed in each of those specific areas.
Senator Robertson?
Give them 12 hours, then they can choose the flexibility, because one of the statements you just made about the smaller counties, I got a call driving up yesterday that the smaller counties are going to have an issue with the required 2 Saturdays. Some of them are, because of manpower. I've got a small community within Harris County that they bust their budget on early voting, having people sit there, 3 people manning the polls and nobody coming in for a week. And so that as far as the 12 hours, I think that is a very clear accommodation, even if they want to use the full 12. But as we walk through, like I said, I've had some concerns from small counties about shall on the 2 Saturdays.
Well, that is another byproduct that we hear of the 2 Georgias all the time. We have obviously in the greater metro area, they have a greater need for longer hours, and fortunately they have the budget to provide for that. And some of our smaller ones, and I have those in my area as well, that you don't want to disenfranchise any voters, but you also got to be cognizant of their needs of that area, and they just don't need as many hours.
So are we going to be able to find any flexibility on that, allowing the election supervisor of that county of saying that, I've got this many that have already voted, so I'm only going to use 1 Saturday? Or with the shall in there, they're locked in to 2 Saturdays?
As it sits right now with the shall, they're locked in there for 2 Saturdays.
And this, they're drawing funds from other parts of their municipal budget to pay for this. So
That's correct.
my concern. Yes, sir.
Chair recognizes the minority leader.
So if I'm not further confused, counties like DeKalb and Gwinnett wish they had that kind of problem where people are just sitting around doing nothing. So I think that if if you do the 12 hours and let the counties choose, it would be a better option for, as the chairman suggested.
Other comments on Senate substitute to House Bill 531? Any other questions or comments for the majority leader? This is a, sorry. Chair recognizes Senator Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious as to the posture we're in. I mean, I'd be glad to either second Leader Dugan's amendment there or make it myself, but I wasn't sure if we were doing that at this point or not. So.
Thank you. There was an amendment to his substitute. Leader Dugan, you make that in the form of an amendment? I did. Thank you. And then a second from Senator Burke. A question from?
So we're not amending this bill today. He's just asking for suggestions.
We're just amending the substitute, but we're not taking action on the underlying substitute. No, ma'am.
Okay.
So we're trying to clarify this limited language. I believe it's in 530, 533, 517, 522. Is that correct? It's where we're replacing just the language with from removing beginning and putting in no later than, and removing ending and putting in no earlier than. Is that correct? Sorry.
That's correct.
So it occurs in 4 places. So what we're doing now is just adjusting this substitute. We're not acting on the substitute. We're just amending the substitute.
When we come time to vote on this, what I'd rather do is have had the discussion here in the committee and talk this all the way through.
Good.
Before that, so everybody knows completely what we're talking about and how we got to where we are.
I appreciate the leader's flexibility. We're having a discussion this morning, and the input from the discussion, I'd ask the leader to take it back, make appropriate adjustments, and then perhaps we can bring it up again in the morning at 8 o'clock with any adjustments that were made. So these were friendly discussions. Is that fair, Mr. Leader?
So far.
And let's continue to that. So we won't take, if it's okay, we'll table a formal amendment to this. We'll let you continue to take input and make adjustments.
Okay, I got it. And the only other difference in this one that I would like to point out is in section 29, which is on page 37. It's the serial number addition on the ballot. What I have noticed is there is one other state that I know of right now that has the serial number on the ballots. It's California.
California. That's interesting. So this bill would allow for the serialization of the original ballot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But it would not tie the ballot to the voter.
It does not tie a ballot to the voter.
Thank you.
And they've been using it, I think now for over 10 years.
Very good. Other comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll accept public input on House Bill 531, the substitute LC 280331. Yes, I'm sorry.
The minority leaders.
Minority Leader. Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have an amendment
Okay.
to the, let me find this page and section. I did write it. Let's see. On page. I can't find it yet.
What's the section?
19. It's on page 16 and 17. And the amendment would remove or add a section 19A. It would remove lines 386 through 416 on drop boxes.
We're looking at
On
page 16.
Page 16 and 17. It would take us back to the original way we handled drop boxes, which worked well for voters.
Do you have that in a form?
I do.
Good. If you would, we will distribute that so we can all have the same information.
Oh, wait a minute. The top of the original. 1 and 2. Put it on there. You find them 1 and 2 on top. I'll take that back.
Will you distribute this? Thank you. We have an amendment. Now, this is a substantial adjustment, but I believe I have a motion from the minority leader. I need a second for discussion. I have a second to the amendment. I have a second from Senator Harrell. Thank you. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming that the minority leader knows that since that was drop boxes in the last election cycle were put in by emergency order and they are not codified under law, that 120 days after the emergency order is done, there is no provision for drop boxes in Georgia code and they would all be removed.
And that's why I'm offering the amendment to go in the law. I know that it was an emergency.
But by striking the language that's in here, which does codify their use, you would kill them.
This adds the language back in. Not the language that's in the bill, but it substitutes the language.
So you're looking for drop boxes everywhere. Okay.
Further discussion on Minority Leader's Amendment, AM 281841. Further discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes the senator from 29th.
I guess to ask the same question that the minority leader, on line 7 is, your intention is they can, one or as many as they want, as a means for absentee mail electors to deliver their ballots to the registrars? Is that correct?
I'm sure that the counties would have as many drop boxes as they can afford to have.
Absolutely.
I know they wouldn't have from 1 to 10, but they
Yes,
would
ma'am.
have drop boxes that they can afford to have.
Okay, that would be entirely up to the registrar to do that. Thank you, ma'am.
Other questions, comments? Hearing none, call the question. Those who are in favor of Amendment 281841, indicate with the uplifted hand. Those opposed by same sign. 2 for, 4 against. The amendment fails for this request. Are there other comments or questions before we accept witness input? Hearing none, we'll move to accepting input from various organizations. If you would, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. We've got a fairly short list this morning. If you would, identify yourself and your organization and indicate whether you are in favor or opposed to this legislation. The chair recognizes Todd Edwards. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Todd Edwards. I'm with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. In the interest of keeping it within 3 minutes, I'm going to go relatively quickly through these concerns. We're neither for nor against. There are some provisions we'd like your consideration and further enhancing. A couple of things that this bill does remove from the original legislation is establishing a deadline by which absentee ballot applications can be received. Currently, it's the Friday before the election. The legislation had 11 days before the election. This strikes that out. Second, the bill originally had authorized counties to reduce the 1 per 250 ratio. That's 1 machine per 250 electors during non-general elections. That would have saved counties a lot of time and administration. That we would like to see that reinstated in the bill, please. And then otherwise, the old bill authorized county election workers or poll workers to serve outside of a county in which they live or work. We do appreciate that. That was one of our agenda items. That was also removed from the bill. The language on going through the bill now, Section 3, underperforming election superintendents, the removal, that language has gotten much better. Obviously, depending on what version ends up on sine die the last day, we're concerned about what it might cost the county if we have to pay 2 superintendents at once. Again, this language is better than what we've originally seen. And also legal fees in case they hire an attorney. The way I still read this bill in Section 6, it requires the counties to have mobile voting units because you remove the language at the discretion. The way I and our attorneys read it is they have to have them, and then the if needed is when they have to deploy them. We'd like to see that language change, please, to not require this, particularly for the smaller counties. Anytime that, on to Section 13, the encrypted ballot paper, we don't have the exact cost, but currently counties pay 13 cents per piece of paper for ballots. We have reason to believe, and I think it was given in testimony by the sponsor of the original bill, this would more than double that cost. It would have a large impact on our smaller counties. We feel that if the state feels that these measures are necessary, we would very much appreciate the state paying for this paper. On absentee ballot drop boxes, ACCG does support them. Currently in this bill, it leaves it to counties as an option. We appreciate that. If it were up to the will of this committee and the General Assembly to allow greater flexibility to place some of them outside, we would certainly appreciate your consideration in that regard. This bill does add an additional in Section 21, early voting Saturday. And not only is that adds an additional day for early voting for Georgia's counties to pay for, it takes away the language in the bill that required only the Saturday voting for state and federal elections. So this would be all elections, including a special election for a primary. Or, you know, all elections in municipalities. I'm not sure if they're aware of this language, but I believe they would be concerned as well. We'd appreciate not adding the second Saturday, and if you do, then removing that it doesn't have to be for all elections, but only pertain to federal and state elections. There's various provisions throughout the bill, and I'm about to sum it up, Mr. Chairman, in Section 21 that requires notifications, timely notifications, be published on a county website. Our smaller counties, many of them don't have websites. And if they do, they're static. They may be run through the local Chamber of Commerce. Someone might say, well, let's go to the legal organ. Well, oftentimes they're bi-weekly. You can't get anything timely. They're unreliable, and that adds additional cost. We respectfully suggest that counties that don't have websites have the option to provide it to the Secretary of State for a one-stop shop, statewide website, if you will, centralized, where all these notices can be found. But again, smaller counties, they're not going to have the websites. They're not going to be able to meet that requirement. Lastly in the bill, there's a lot of reporting requirements, particularly on the election day up to and past the closing of the polls. I continue to talk with local election superintendents to gauge the cost and the administrative feasibility of that, and I believe we have one speaking after me if you'd like to address it, Tani. And that sums it up. I did it as quickly as I could, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. We have a question from the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. A couple different things. I'm not going to go through everything that you said.
Yes, sir.
But the notification on the website does tie back into the Secretary of State's website. And we mentioned that several times during the committee meeting, that all the county's responsibility is refer back to the appropriate place on the Secretary of State's website. And just out of curiosity, how much does a drop box cost?
May I address your first one? I
Sure.
appreciate that. If I missed it, I sincerely apologize.
That's all right.
But if that is actually, and again, I read
Yeah.
things quickly, a lot of bills, but that would be great. Just
Yeah, they don't have
if-
to make their own.
If you don't have it?
They just put a link to.
Thank you, sir. I apologize
Okay.
if I misspoke.
No.
Now, how much does it cost for a drop box?
Right.
It depends, but there are the emergency rule, which all were correct, which authorized them for that short period. With the security cameras and whatnot, I don't have a cost on that.
You were just pertaining to cost in several other areas and how it was going to impact the more rural counties.
Sure, and also the discretion. I
yeah.
referenced that as well, yes, sir.
Yeah, but you're disenfranchising rural voters by not giving them the same advantages you are urban voters by not allowing them an equal playing field. So if we're going to do the cost impact on one side, then we need to look at the cost impact on the other side as well.
And our position was optional, but you raise certainly a good point. If you are going to have all counties provide the same number of boxes under the same conditions, that would be a concern, but that's why we'd ask for optional. But
Okay.
I do understand that concern. I've heard it. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the minority leader for a question.
Actually was going to ask that question, that if you knew how much drop boxes cost. And some of the counties have already invested money in security for these drop boxes. And I think it would be a lot cheaper rather than having a person that you've got to pay. And it's strange that the majority leader mentioned cost, because there is not a fiscal note for this bill, and there's many things in this bill that cost extra money. So I think there should be a fiscal note on this.
Yes, ma'am. One of the concerns is from the counties that have already invested the money. But again, I see the impact it may have on those that may not be able to afford it, and that's why we did ask for the option. But as I sit down, I'll see if I can come up with a number. I'll check with our election officials.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the senator from the 29th.
Majority Leader, my information, they're about $3,500 each. And weren't those, a lot of the drop boxes provided through federal funding?
Well, actually,
And the last time, or through some of the, through the donated funds?
Yeah, it calls into question those grants that are proposed to be abolished under this, and also there were, the private or third-party grants. A lot of them were funded through that, and some of them, I believe, were also funded by the CARES Act funding that was funneled through the Secretary of State's office for PPE and other type materials. But again, our next speaker would probably more adequately address that.
And because of the concern, the drop boxes that were used in these past elections, I'm assuming the counties still have those, correct? The municipalities and counties
I
that
would imagine
received
for
them?
the most part they're in storage. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is a lot of the money that came from these did not come from county budgets, but some of them came through private funding. And I'm just curious, of those that came through private funding, how many of them went to Harris County or Dolliver County or Doherty? How many went to places outside of the major metro areas around the state?
So to the first part of the statement, I will address, I believe it was a combination. Some use grants, some use the state, some the third party, and some from their own budgets. As far as the counties, I don't know specifically. I know there are at least 30, maybe 33 counties that received that grant funding throughout the state. I'm not sure if those counties you mentioned actually apply.
I don't think they do.
Okay.
Chair recognizes minority leader for a question.
There were grants that were offered, and each county could take advantage of those grants, and if they didn't, then that was on them, but there were sufficient monies available for counties to take advantage of.
Any further questions for the witness? Thank you, Mr. Edwards. We
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate your
Chairman.
input. Chair recognizes, is it Tonic Adams? Tonic? Mr. Adams. Please give us your name and your affiliation.
Good morning. My name is Tony Adams. I'm the election supervisor for Heard County, just south of Leader Dugan's area. I'm going to discuss a few things as far as how this bill affects election operations. First of all, I would like to say that many election officials are very concerned with the language that discusses the takeover of election offices. I would refer to the there is already existing in code, existing language that allows for takeover of elections offices in dire circumstances, and it actually involves the court system with checks and balances. I would invite you to read 21.232. The way that section of the code reads is if there is a concern that's brought to the courts then can go through a process by which the state election board would then be able to step in and run an election should there be a potential for fraud or malfeasance. I will go on now to, I would actually like to follow up on what Senator Robertson was discussing about Saturday voting. We had a municipal election in our county that involved 2 cities with less than 1,000 people. For 3 weeks, we had early voting. We had 8 voters in 3 weeks. And 2 of those voters were myself and one of my board members who happened to be citizens of those cities. So we would ask that Saturday voting only be required for federal and state elections. It is a very large burden to have to sit in an elections office for 8 hours and not see anyone come in to vote. So we would ask that that only be required for for federal and state elections. I would also like to discuss drop boxes. One aspect of drop boxes that you might not have thought about is this situation. The voter who has waited until the weekend before the election to drop their ballot off at the elections office and they work. If the drop boxes are not available after hours, that voter has 2 options. That voter has to either drop it in the mail, which some people are not very confident with the mail system, or that voter must wait until election day to take their ballot with them. And that's one thing we've been trying to avoid, is having voters who have gotten absentee ballots going to the polls having already received a ballot. So if they have no option to drop that ballot off after hours, those are their only 2 options. I will say that Heard County did not decide to do drop boxes, and here's our reason why. In Franklin, our small town, our post office is actually across the street from the courthouse, and we have a very good arrangement with our postmaster. Any ballots that are dropped off in our post office go directly into our post office, into our post office box. So there is no delay for voters dropping off their ballots, and that goes all the way up until 7 p.m. on election day. Our postmaster stayed in the office and waited for any voters that brought in ballots to leave their ballot at the post office. It was dropped into our box. Now, on the opposite side of that, I just finished a special election for a sales tax referendum. I had 3 voters who dropped their ballot off the day before the election at Hogansville Post Office, and I received those ballots on Wednesday. So those ballots were too late to be received in our office. We appreciate the fact that drop boxes are not required. We believe that those should be at the option of the election supervisor. I will say, though, that if drop boxes are required to be inside the polling place, our office is a single office where everything takes place. My desk is in there. We have all of our early voting that takes place in that single office. They will be useless. They will be, basically, when the voter comes in to return their ballot in person, we take the ballot from the voter directly. So there is no need for a drop box if we have them inside. And that is the case with many election offices in the state. If someone comes to the office with a ballot, if the drop box is inside, they would probably just be just as well off to hand that ballot to directly to the elections official. Let me see, what else was I going? In respect to you, Leader Dugan, I would like to explain what you mean by the serial number. Whenever a ballot is duplicated by a duplication team, there is a unique number given to the original ballot that can then match to the duplicated ballot. The serial number does not refer to the serial number itself being printed on a ballot. For instance, if I'm going to take a ballot that was damaged and is uncountable, I will take that ballot and have a duplication team duplicate it. At that point, that ballot will then be given just a, let's say the first ballot was 1. So you'll write a 001 on that ballot, and you'll write a 001 on the duplicate. And that, all that is done in red ink so that it doesn't affect the scanner. And that's the way that we duplicate all of our ballots, whether they're overvoted, uncountable, or out of precinct provisional. We do all of our ballots the same way. So that's what you mean by a serial number, in all respect to you, sir.
We appreciate the witness's input. We'll get some clarification on that, but first, I have a question from the President Pro Tem. Mr. President?
Actually, I just had a comment, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank the gentleman for being here this morning.
We do appreciate it.
And applying common sense. Common sense is increasingly uncommon these days. And thank you very much for advocating for all your voters in your district. I would ask, when you have, you did say that you had 8 votes in a municipal election, and when you had the early voting for the state and federal elections, what was your turnout?
For our general election last year, we had 2,587. So I believe we even had 120 on the Saturday.
So it was appropriate that you would be open in advance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Leader?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard that early voting comment with the federal and state piece several times now. That would be something else I would hold out to the committee. I really don't care one way or another. I need to, on the major elections that you're going to have a significantly increased turnout, I could see the need, but on some of the smaller ones, I'm willing to discuss that point on this.
Other comments from the committee? Senator Fred Knight?
And I agree with that, especially in a small county, a city like Shiloh. I mean, they get blistered on early voting. Listen, I want to thank you for coming here, Tommy, and talking to us. A friend of mine in Muskogee County speaks highly of you. But you talked about the procrastinating voter. Do you think we should look at conforming our rules and regs to the outlier, to the procrastinator, or do you think that the responsible voter should be more of our target? And I know our lives get busy. I swim in that stream. I'm just concerned if we stretch our rules, make accommodations and everything for that outlier that rushes down for everything, including the water bill and the power bill.
Well, in respect to your question, that also would apply for anyone that worked, for instance, if they're a third shift worker, they're still not going to be able to turn their ballot in person anytime if those ballot boxes are not available. So it wouldn't matter if it was a last minute or not.
Well, as a person who worked third shift a lot of years, I was able to vote by, I mean, the elections offices are very accommodating, right. Whether early, in person, whatever. I knew the hours and I was able to go and vote. So my concern is, and I appreciate your response, but my concern is there are times when I need to go and mail a letter in Catawba, Georgia, and the post office is closed. And so I have to, work within those hours. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing it up, and I certainly appreciate your support on understanding that a lot of these small communities that seem to be left out of the conversation, even more rural counties than the one you live in and the one I live in, seem to be at the will of larger counties that have things much easier. And so in Harris County, our registrar just became a full-time employee, and we had to fight, battles just to get that, and she
She's a
does an
good lady.
incredible job. She does. Don't tell her I told you her name was Betty, but because that's not what she goes by. But thank you for speaking up for your occupation, your profession, and I appreciate you.
We appreciate your testimony. Is it the sense of the committee that we ask the leader to consider the option of, in the smaller counties, or providing some language that would allow Saturday voting options for some small communities? Is that the sense of the committee? We won't take a vote, but Mr. Leader?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think that we can do population-based legislation on this, but what we can do is define the type of election that it is, and then do it optional in those. Like a municipal election in the city of Atlanta is going to be different than a municipal election in the city of Bowden.
Correct.
Just
Correct.
demographics are different with the
Good point.
with the population. But having that flexibility on the, I don't want to call them non-major, because if you're the candidate for the mayor of Bowden, that's a pretty major election for you. But you understand what I'm saying.
Correct. Well, then, since the committee to allow the leader to work on this language, perhaps with additional input from Mr. Adams and Senator Robertson, see if we can come to a good position on this.
I would, and I would also like to wade into the water and consider additional funding for these counties that are impacted. It seems like a lot of the funding went toward the more prosperous counties in this last cycle, and I
Are
think
you
we need
referring to third-party funding, Senator?
third-party funding coming in. I would like the lessers to be able to move to the front of the line in some of these, of course, with proper application and other things to offset some of the costs even beyond the additional Saturday, because it's
Is it
busting
not true,
budgets.
Senator, that the legislation includes some language, and perhaps it's in the House version that would allow?
It's in the House version.
Yes, sir.
It's a House version which would allow the Secretary of State's office to provide a grant program that would accept funds and then distribute them more equitably across the state.
It is. I believe it is in the House bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adams. We appreciate your time.
Mr. Chair, before he goes, so I just drop boxes again. So for our voters who don't trust the Postal Service, who don't want to vote in person early, who don't want to vote on election day, what good does it do? When, maybe not in Heard County, but in a lot of areas where there's a significant line out there where where you're going to hand your ballot to a person, you're not standing in that line. So you can walk in, drop it, and go.
True.
That's the benefit of it.
True.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Chair recognizes Senator from the 40th for a question.
There was a question about how much do drop boxes cost, and I have to admit I'm struggling a little bit this morning because I left my glasses at home, so I'm like struggling to see my phone. But I do have some data that drop boxes can range from anywhere from $800 to $12,000, so it's a huge range, but the average maybe being around $2,000 for drop boxes.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Kevin Huachin. Huachin? I messed it. J-O, gotta put my glasses on, my apologies. Joachin. Huachin. I'm working on it, sir. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for being passionate. We look forward to your input.
Yes, sir. Thank you for allowing me to speak, committee members. My name is Kevin Huachin. I'm a community organizer from the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. We worked across all counties in the state of Georgia during the last two elections, speaking to over 430,000 Latino voters. And I'm also from Tifton, Georgia. I lived about 20 minutes away from the elections, my polling location. And I know just how difficult it can be for people in rural areas to exercise their right to vote. But I also I also don't think that providing urban counties here in the metro area with more drop boxes disenfranchises voters in rural areas, because in the 2020 general elections, there were only 9,000 people who came out to vote. In Cobb County, there were almost 400,000 people who came out to vote. The pandemic allowed us to have this perception that voters who normally just can't exercise their right to vote just needed to be provided with an easier method to come out and vote. So the county established like 16 different drop box locations throughout the entire county. And so I think that this was a really good idea. And I think that the language that this bill says in section 16, I don't know if I was looking at the section that's online, or I don't know if the substitutes already address like that this has also been changed. But for example, it says that the determinant for the amount of drop box locations will be the lesser of either. If there are 100,000 active registered voters in a county, or the amount of advanced polling locations in a county. It's different now? Okay, well.
If we can get a good reference on the section, Mr. Leader, do you have a? Section 19, let's look carefully at section 19 and see if anything is addressed there. Page 15. Page 15, section 19.
If not, I can still continue with.
Thank you.
Okay.
Continue with your input, and we'll try to identify the correct area within the legislation.
Okay.
Not in there. Thank you.
So it says that the determinant for the amount of drop box locations is the lesser of either. 100,000 voters per county. Cobb County active voters were almost 400,000 voters. So that's 4 drop box locations. The other option of the other determinant is the amount of advanced polling locations. Cobb County had 9. So does that mean that there will be only 4 drop boxes in the entire county because that's the lesser determinant to figure out how many drop boxes there will be in the county? I think that the pandemic allowed us to see what community members needed, what working class voters needed, and I just think that this is a bad idea. And I just ask that you vote no on HB 531.
Okay, just point of clarification, Mr. Leader.
Mr. Chair, I agree with them too. I think it's not a good idea. That's why it's not in here. But I would be willing to look at if the pandemic has continued or the state of emergency is still going, the emergency order would still apply and the drop boxes could be external to the building. Mr. Chair, I hate to do this. You're about to lose a quorum.
You're correct. You're very correct. We have one more witness. We can continue accepting testimony without a quorum because we'll be taking no action on this bill. It's one of those challenging days. I would say that I would direct your attention to the House substitute to SB 202 because I think you will find some language in their bill that might correspond to where you are.
Where can the substitutes be found for the public?
If we have the substitutes here, if they have not been acted on, you'll need to contact the chair of that committee, and we'll be happy to provide you an electronic copy or a physical copy. I do understand the number of meetings are proceeding. We have one more witness I'd like to accept. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Huachin. Huachin? Am I getting closer? Yes. Thank you. I'm getting closer. Huachin. Ms. Battles? Cindy Battles. We look forward to your input. Thank you. And the leader has left the room. That gives us an opportunity to discuss this more. No, please.
I hate that he left. I actually had a question.
Okay, we'll try to take it to him and ask him to
Thank
share.
you. So my name is Cindy Battles. I am the Policy and Engagement Director with the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. I know I struggle on that, but y'all admit that's a mouthful.
It is.
First of all, Chairman, I would like to thank you.
Okay.
You and I had a conversation the other day. I really appreciate the way that this has been handled, that the committee members actually had a chance to look it over, and that when you said, I'll get you a copy, you did. So I do want to point that out.
Thank you.
I don't have any great literature references today, y'all. I apologize. I just want to run through a few things really fast for the sake of time. Section 1 requires the Attorney General to create a telephone hotline for the purpose of gathering allegations or complaints. We've talked about this before. One of the reasons that the State Election Board was so far behind on hearings is because the previous Secretary of State did not hold those hearings the way that he's supposed to. All respect to the governor, of course. But that is what happened. The Secretary of State has done a great job of getting those caught up. The reasoning that was given behind this is because of the State Election Board's workload and it looking like they couldn't keep up, but that's not the case. If the Attorney General investigates these, they're automatically criminalized, and in a good portion of them, what really needs to happen is that a letter of instruction needs to be given to the voter or the board. So my concern about Section 1 immediately is that we're going to criminalize simple mistakes that should have needed a letter of instruction instead of letting the State Election Board handle it. Section 3 to me is very dangerous. I have a serious concern with Section 3, given that it gives majority parties the ability to remove a county election supervisor if they're unhappy with the way the performance is going. To me, that means that the county election officer is going to be more beholden to the majority party than they are their voters or an election process. And I believe that in the 2020 election, we saw exactly how dangerous that could be, especially when we're seeing so many local resolutions that are basically taking over County Board of Elections. Section 4 requires the race and gender to be added to this list, this master list. My concern on that is that people who want to challenge voters are specifically going to challenge voters based on their race, because we know that there is this idea that certain races vote a certain way and that could be used to disenfranchise voters. We are talking a lot about cost and the cost of drop boxes today. I find that really interesting since Section 6 requires counties to buy a mobile voting unit. I'm pretty sure drop boxes cost more or cost less than a mobile voting unit. I understand kind of what the thought process is because we're talking about emergency procedures, but I'm going to suggest that a generator would cost less than a mobile voting unit, especially since even with Hurricane Michael, we only saw several counties that had to move polling locations. The ones that did, that was either because FEMA had taken over the building or there was no power. So I think if you're going to mandate anything, you should mandate generators. I think those are my major. Oh, the Section 13, the special paper. I know that this has been addressed, but several counties have spoken out against this because of the cost. I think that the idea that if the state's going to say you have to use this special paper is going to be a thing, then maybe the state should pay for it. The closest thing we've gotten to an idea of how much it cost, Joseph Kirk from Bartow County testified it cost 13 cents more. Senator Tippins, it was a couple of $1 million, which I think we could give to the education fund instead of special paper, especially since this idea of ballot fraud using ballots that just feel different has never been is an unfounded accusation. Other than that, there's like a couple of small things. I'll send those to y'all in writing because I do want to use a couple of my minutes to talk about, again, we keep talking, 1 minute we're talking about cost and how much this costs, especially if it's drop boxes we don't like, but we're also making them by mobile voting units, and then we're also making them hire additional staff or pay staff to work all night long. Going back to what you were saying about small counties, Jones County has 2 full-time staff people. I talked to them so much during the 2020 election, they know the sound of my voice. Their days late, they're working nearly to the point of breaking and near tears, but what we're now telling them is not only will they start counting as soon as the polling location closes, but they will continue counting through the night. I don't know if anyone has talked to county election officials, especially smaller ones, but some of these poll workers are getting paid $100 a day. So you're telling them that they're going to start counting as soon as polling locations close when they've already worked 15 hours, and that they're going to count until they're done for $100 to $150 a day. And then the other thing, we're talking about drop boxes. Dougherty County, Lowndes County, Richmond County, and Bartow County have all testified in regards to 531 and drop boxes, which I sent you guys a list of these testimonies and what they had said. Not only did they all get funding from sources, they used it to purchase drop boxes. As of December 30th, only 15 counties did not have drop boxes. There's about 330 drop boxes statewide. Our average is that cost about $564,000 with around $60,000 in shipping. So when the counties are saying, hey, we've invested in these, we'd like to continue using them, I think maybe we should honor that investment and let the counties use them the way that they have found works best for them. That's basically all I've got. I will yield for questions.
Thank you. Does the committee have questions for the witness? We appreciate Ms. Battles.
Thank you, sir.
Again, someone who is always available, always willing to share her perspectives, and we're grateful for that. We're in the absence of a quorum, and we will take no action this morning. I would, just from a point of information, we need to lay this substitute on the table. Without objection, we'll put it on the table. We'll take it back in the morning at 8 a.m. 8 a.m. in the morning. This room? We don't know. It may be next door. But we will reconsider HB 531, the Senate substitute HB 531. Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.